The morning sun spilled over the rooftops of Maple Ridge Estates, turning the freshly mowed lawns and white fences into a postcard of quiet perfection. Birds chattered from the maple trees lining the street, and a soft hum of sprinklers filled the still air. Diane Carter stood at the edge of her property, a hammer in one hand and a wooden post in the other, her gaze fixed on the patch of grass where she would finally take her stand. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and morning dew, but underneath it was something sharper: resolve. She drove the first nail in with a sharp thunk. The hammer's vibration jolted up her arm, satisfying in its finality. Another nail, another solid strike, and then she stepped back to look at her handiwork. The white sign gleamed in the sunlight, its black letters bold and unflinching: private property, no trespassing. It wasn't much, really. A piece of painted wood. But to her it was a declaration, a line drawn in the manicured sand. For 6 months she'd been writing emails, printing letters, and attending HOA meetings that felt more like trials than discussions. Every time she had brought up the same issue, the so-called community easement behind her yard. According to the board, the grassy strip running between her fence and the drainage ditch was open to all residents for recreational passage, which in practice meant that children cut through her property to reach the playground, dog walkers treated her yard as a path, and the landscaping company the HOA hired trampled her rose bed more than once. She'd asked for documentation, proof, anything showing the HOA had rights to that land. They'd waved her off with bureaucratic jargon. It's in the community plan. It's part of the easement rights. But when she'd gone to the county clerk and pulled the plat map herself, the truth was clear. The land was hers, deeded and registered in her name. The HOA hadn't liked that. Now, she figured the sign would speak louder than another ignored email. As she stood there admiring it, a car door clicked across the street. Mark Delaney, her neighbor of 8 years, ambled down his driveway with a steaming mug in hand. He wore his usual Saturday uniform: slippers, plaid shorts, and a faded college t-shirt. "Morning, Diane," he called, raising the mug in greeting. "Morning," she said, brushing sawdust from her jeans. He nodded toward the sign, smirking. "Bit bold, aren't you? Linda's going to have a field day." Diane straightened, meeting his eyes across the street. "Let her. I'm tired of people walking through my backyard like it's a shortcut." He chuckled, though his tone carried a note of warning. "You know she'll call a meeting about it, probably send you one of those violation notices. I've read the bylaws," Diane said, picking up the hammer again. "Section 4B doesn't apply to privately owned lots." Mark shrugged. "Still, you're poking the bear. Maybe it's time someone did," she replied. He gave a small, sympathetic smile before retreating up his driveway. Diane watched him go, feeling a flicker of doubt twist in her stomach. Mark wasn't wrong. The HOA, especially Linda Winters, the board president, didn't take kindly to defiance. But she pushed the thought away. She'd done her homework, the land was hers, and that was that. A gentle breeze rustled the sign, making it creak slightly against the post. Diane crouched down, pressing the soil firmly around the base. She could smell the damp earth, the faint sweetness of honeysuckle from her fence, and underneath it, the quiet pulse of adrenaline in her veins. She straightened and took a step back, studying the scene. From the sidewalk, the sign stood out starkly against the neat green of her lawn, the kind of thing that demanded attention. She imagined Linda driving by in her silver SUV, spotting it, and nearly choking on her morning latte. The thought made Diane smile for the first time in weeks. Inside the house, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She wiped her hands on her jeans and went to check it. The HOA Facebook group was already lighting up. A post from one of the neighborhood moms read, "Anyone know why Diane Carter put up a private property sign? Looks ugly and unnecessary. We all share that path." Within minutes, comments were piling up. Typical Diane always has to make a scene. Good for her. That path's not public land. The HOA should fine her for defacing the neighborhood's look. Diane scrolled, half irritated, half amused. It was incredible how fast gossip spread here. Faster than the wind through the maples. She typed a quick reply. For clarification, that strip is part of my deeded lot, not community property. The sign is to prevent further trespassing. It didn't take long for the post to draw more fire. The HOA says otherwise. We all agreed to community guidelines when we bought here. Just because it's your lot doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Diane set the phone down with a sigh. She'd expected pushback. That was fine. Let them talk. Let them tag Linda. By late morning, a silver SUV rolled slowly down the street and came to a stop in front of her house. She didn't have to look twice. Linda Winters stepped out, perfectly pressed khakis and all, clipboard tucked neatly under one arm. She walked up the path like she owned it. "Good morning, Diane," Linda said, voice syrupy and sharp at once. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "Depends who you ask," Diane replied, arms crossed. Linda glanced at the sign, then back at her clipboard. "I see you've installed unauthorized signage on what's technically common land." "Not common," Diane said evenly. "Lot 37, fully deeded to me. You can verify with the county if you like." Linda pursed her lips. "That area has been designated an easement for years. You can't just change things on your own." Diane tilted her head. "An easement that isn't in the deed, nor in the recorded plat. Funny how that works." Linda's fingers tightened around her clipboard. "If you don't remove that sign within 72 hours, the board will take action. Fines, possibly legal escalation." Diane's smile was small, tired, but unshakable. "Then you'll be escalating against the county record. I'll look forward to that." For a moment, neither woman spoke. The sound of a lawnmower buzzed faintly down the street. A single maple leaf drifted between them. Finally, Linda's voice softened, but only on the surface. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, Diane. No one wants conflict." "Then stop walking through my property," Diane said simply. Linda's eyes hardened. "You'll regret this." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked briskly back to her SUV, clipboard clutched like a weapon. The car door slammed, and the vehicle glided away, quiet and controlled. Diane stood there for a long moment, listening to the echo fade down the street. Then she looked back at her sign, standing sturdy and sure in the ground, the bold letters catching the sun. Maybe she would regret it. Maybe the HOA would make things miserable, but for the first time in months, the boundaries of her world felt clear, solid, defined, hers. She picked up the hammer, wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, and went inside to make coffee, the faint creak of the sign behind her sounding almost like a heartbeat. The following afternoon unfolded with the deceptive calm of suburbia, sunlight filtering through blinds, the distant hum of a leaf blower, and the faint buzz of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. Diane sat at her kitchen table, a mug of cooling tea beside her laptop, half reading an email she didn't care about. She had been waiting for this moment, though she wouldn't admit it to herself. The sign had been up for 24 hours. The neighborhood gossip had burned hot through Facebook. Now it was only a matter of time before someone from the HOA came knocking. The knock, when it came, was sharp and deliberate, 3 crisp raps that echoed through the quiet house. Not a neighbor's tentative tap, not a delivery driver's hurried thud. This was a knock of authority. Diane closed her laptop slowly and stood. She glanced toward the front window, where sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor in a golden rectangle. Through the glass, she caught a glimpse of beige slacks, a clipboard, and the unmistakable silhouette of Linda Winters. Of course, Diane took her time walking to the door. She could already imagine the look on Linda's face, the mix of polite disapproval and self-assured righteousness that only an HOA president could perfect. When she opened the door, her prediction was nearly exact. "Good afternoon, Diane," Linda said, her voice honeyed but tight. Her posture was impeccable, chin high, a pen clipped neatly to the top of her clipboard like a badge. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," Diane said, though her tone betrayed the opposite. She leaned against the doorframe, one arm crossed over her chest. "What can I do for you, Linda?" Linda smiled, a thin, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to talk to you about the sign you installed yesterday. The board has received several complaints." Diane raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure you have. It violates Section 4B of the Maple Ridge Community Guidelines," Linda continued, flipping a page on her clipboard. "No resident may post unauthorized signage on shared property or in visible areas that disrupt neighborhood uniformity." Diane had been ready for that. "That's not shared property," she said, keeping her tone measured. "That's part of my lot. You can check the county's plat map if you'd like." Linda's lips tightened. "The grassy strip behind your fence has been part of the community easement since Maple Ridge was built. It's for the enjoyment and access of all residents. That's what you keep saying." Diane replied, "But I've looked at the actual records. There's no easement recorded. It's deeded to me. The property line extends 3 feet beyond that fence." Linda blinked, momentarily thrown off by Diane's certainty. "Well, regardless," she said after a pause, "it's been treated as an easement for years. Precedent matters." "Precedent doesn't trump ownership," Diane said, her patience thinning. "If you want to treat my property as public land, you'll need legal documentation. Do you have any?" Linda's eyes flicked down to her clipboard. "I don't have the original documents on me, but—" "Of course you don't," Diane cut in. "Because they don't exist." The two women stood there for a moment in the silence that followed. Outside, the distant bark of a dog punctuated the air. Somewhere, down the street, a door slammed. The neighborhood was alive, but their small stretch of it felt frozen. Linda cleared her throat, regaining composure. "Diane, I understand you're frustrated, but the board has to think about the community as a whole. One person's decision affects everyone. If everyone started putting up signs or fences, it would ruin the neighborhood's character." "I didn't put up a billboard, Linda," Diane said. "I put up a sign telling people to stop trespassing. That's not ruining the neighborhood, that's protecting my home." Linda shifted her weight, her composure cracking just slightly. "You've always been independent," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But these rules are here to keep things orderly. They protect property values." Diane almost laughed. "You mean they protect your control? I've lived here 10 years, paid every due on time, and followed every guideline. But the moment I assert my rights, suddenly I'm a problem." Mark, who had been trimming his hedge across the street, slowed his movements. He was pretending not to listen, but the faint pause in his rhythm gave him away. A few houses down, someone's blinds twitched. The neighborhood grapevine was already stirring. Linda noticed the attention, too. Her voice dropped lower, more urgent. "Look, Diane, let's not make this a spectacle. If you take the sign down, I can speak to the board. Maybe we can arrange a compromise." "Like what?" Diane asked, crossing her arms. "Letting strangers walk through my property half the time instead of all the time." Linda's expression hardened. "If you won't cooperate, the board will have to escalate this. You'll receive a formal notice of violation and possibly fines." Diane stepped out onto the porch, closing the distance between them by a few feet. The air felt heavy, like a storm was waiting somewhere behind the blue sky. "Do what you have to, Linda," she said quietly, "but I'm not taking it down." Linda's jaw clenched. "You're making this difficult." "No," Diane replied, her voice calm but sharp. You are?" A long silence stretched between them. For the first time, Diane noticed the faint tremor in Linda's fingers where she gripped the clipboard. She wasn't used to being challenged. Most people in Maple Ridge didn't bother. They rolled over, paid their fines, painted their shutters beige when told. But Diane had spent her career as a contracts manager for a construction firm. She'd built her life around reading fine print. And she knew she was right. "All right," Linda said finally, stepping back. "You'll be hearing from us in writing. I hope it doesn't come to that, for your sake." "Me too," Diane said, though she didn't sound worried. Linda turned briskly, her heels clicking against the concrete walkway. She climbed into her silver SUV, slammed the door, and drove away at a pace just slow enough to seem dignified, but fast enough to betray irritation. When the car disappeared around the corner, Diane let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her shoulders loosened. She turned toward the street and saw Mark looking up from his hedge trimmer. "You sure about this?" he called softly. "Positive," she said. He gave a slow nod, like he respected her for it, but his eyes carried a trace of worry. "Linda's not going to let this slide. I don't expect her to," Diane said, and went back inside. The rest of the day passed quietly, though the stillness had an edge to it now. From her living room window, she could see neighbors slowing their walks to glance at the sign. A pair of teenagers on bikes pointed and whispered. The air felt charged, like everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. That evening, as the sun sank behind the houses, Diane stood at her kitchen sink, rinsing a glass, looking out toward the yard. The sign was still there, standing firm in the grass, its white surface glowing faintly in the twilight. It was just a piece of wood and paint, she reminded herself, and yet it represented something far larger, something she hadn't realized she'd needed to prove until now. She turned off the faucet, wiped her hands on a towel, and allowed herself a small, tired smile. Whatever storm was coming, she could handle it. She'd already spent months feeling powerless. This time, she had the facts, the proof, and the will to stand by them. Outside, the sprinkler system clicked on, misting the lawn in a silver sheen. The water droplets clung to the private property sign, catching the last rays of sunlight like sparks. It looked unshakable, even as the wind picked up. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the neighborhood, Diane could almost sense Linda on the phone, already dialing the rest of the board.